I was at school and eating normal Chinese food. But 10 years later, I came to United Kingdom for study and later on get a job and get married, etc. But the most change I have is I'm addicted to this juicy, delicious double cheeseburger. Don't forget also a beer always accompanied with that. I know you're jealous. Okay, I'll save it later. My consumption patterns just gave me a lot of happiness, but also deliver a 6-in-1 pack here, and some high blood pressures, but more importantly, they leave a deep and a large footprint to the environment. A hamburger plus a beer would cost roughly 5,000 liters of water and leave 4.6% kilogram of CO2 to the atmosphere. If the following World Conference today over lunch feeding you this delicious hamburger as I enjoyed, the total together is gonna be almost 4,000 tons of water and 3.5 tons of CO2 emissions. I list the luxury essentials you enjoy every day. What's the environment footprint there? Have you ever thought a morning wake-up coffee is actually cost 130 liters of water, which is equivalent to 2 African children's daily water consumption? And a beer, the total beer consumption in the world every year is gonna generate 200 million tons of CO2 emission to the atmosphere. That's how much it is. It's twice of Belgium and the Czech Republic's annual emission total. Half of France total, 1/4 of Germany's total. Oops. The global climate change debate is always centralized as who is the carbon criminal? Who should take more responsibilities? The United States always say China is the largest emitter in the world, therefore you need to take more responsibility. China usually fight back with, I also produce for your consumptions. So all this argument is based on there's 2 different ways to account emissions. The production-based emissions tells you where the emission comes from. On the other hand, the consumption emissions tells you why the emission occurs. But all the current climate policies, including the Paris Agreement, Kyoto Protocol, is all based on the production-based emissions. For example, Germany has a very ambitious emission reduction goal by reducing 55% of production CO2 emissions by 2030. I want to ask this question, is this sufficient? Is this enough to change the global emissions, given the fact of the Vietnam, Bangladesh, and other Southern Asian countries, they are growing their emission at 10% per year at the same time. So is it useful to understand what's the driving force behind the huge or the rapid increase of the developing countries' emission? This is the emission transfer patterns over the last number of years. Back in 2004, China, together with a number of Eastern Asian countries, they are the world manufacturers. 30% of their annual emissions is because they are producing for export. Those exports, 1/3 of them, they actually goes to United States and Canada. Another 1/3 is to fulfill our consumption in the Western European countries, such as Germany, France, and the UK. Another 1/4 is go to Japan and Australia. Togetherly, 60% of the embodied emission in Chinese trade is because of the consumption in developed countries. In recent years, the emission trade has changed a little bit. From the north to south emission trading patterns gradually changed to south oriented emission trading patterns. Over 2004 to 2017, 51% of embodied emission in Chinese trade, embodied emission in Chinese trade increased 50%. This is because consumption by Indian customers, China's trade with Latin American countries, China's trade with African countries. On the same time, embodied emission in India's export, they are almost doubled. Similarly, it's because Indian trading with China, Indian trading with Middle East and Latin American countries. This paradigm shift have implies more and more growing, getting richer developing country populations require more resources to consume. They want to consume more products, and eventually they want to adapt the Western lifestyles. But the Western lifestyles is full with the throwaway cultures and the buy more and save more principles. All those behaviors leave the deep and the large footprint to the environment. When the Chinese labor become more expensive, environment regulations become tighter, multinational companies look for cheaper places to expand their productions. We can see from this graph, the textiles production in China keep declining in terms of the trade. In contrast, the Indian and other Southern Asia countries, they are increasing. If you walk into your favorite shopping mall just after this conference, you will see a less and less made in China t-shirt and shoes available, but replaced by made in Vietnam and Bangladesh. Similarly, for the mineral and the metal products, when China's export to the West declines for those products, and India, Indonesia, or those Southern Asian countries quickly step in and fill the gap. China and India, there's growing amount of a population getting richer. Especially the young generation are follow to choose the Western lifestyles. They eat fast food, they drive 4x4 cars, they buy the fast fashion brand. This make a consequence to the environment already. Chinese per capita consumption emissions is almost meets the same level as the United Kingdom. There's still some distance between the China and the German figures, but you can foresee in the next few years, Chinese per capita emissions is gonna meet or pass the German figures. But the key question comes to that, within the one planet boundaries, are we able to accommodate 1.3 billion Chinese and 1.2 billion Indians to consume as much as what we do in Germany and in Europe? Within these one planet's boundaries, are we able to allow the Indian, not only the Indian and the Chinese, all the whole population on the earth to consume as much as we do? If everyone on the earth adapt our lifestyle in the European average, we're gonna need 3 more planets' resources to support it. If everyone choose the American lifestyles, we're gonna need 5 more planets' resources. So we only have one planet. If we want to manage the one planet's boundary, manage a good living within the one planet boundaries, what can we do? In 2015, 193 countries adopted the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, published and advocated by United Nations. There's 17 diverse goals from different perspectives, but number 12 specifically saying we need to have a sustainable consumption and productions. But the problem is that we have such diverse world with a great disparity everywhere. which country or which region should focus more on production, who is going to pay more attention to consumption. To answer that questions, we have a look at this figure, to this comparison with the top economy in the world. The yellow bars is the population, the green bars is the consumption emissions, the blue bars is production emissions. Let's have a look at the left-hand side, China and India. China hosts 20% of world populations. They produce 30% of world total emission from production side, but they consume roughly 15% of world emission of the world total. India, on the same time, they host roughly another 20% of world populations, but they only generate 5% of world total from the consumption side. There's lots of regions in India and China is underdeveloped. They are very poor. There's a poverty alleviation to do, and the industrialization stages need to climb up. They are possibly top priorities for development and poverty alleviation, and cleaner production, including increased resource efficiency for their productions. But let's look at the right side of the figure. United States, 5% of world population, but consume 30% of world consumptions. United Kingdom, in the middle, less than 1% of the global total. UK also produce roughly around 1% of the production emissions, but consume 3% of world resources. Similar like Germany, UK has a very ambitious emission reduction from production side. In the UK, we have 80% of emission reduction in 2050s. But my question to myself and to every of you and to many of my colleagues is, 80% of reduction of 1% of global total, does it do any good to global climate change? Does it gonna be significant to help us to change the global climate change, to deliver the 1.5 or 2 degrees C goals set in the Paris Agreement? Can Europe, including Germany and the UK, pay a little bit more attention to consumption side? On one hand, we reduce our own footprint from consumption side, but on the other hand, we set a model. We set a fashionable trend. For the developing populations, they are actually copying, following, adapting the fashion we set. But the current fashion in the West we set is not green. It's pretty black. In the fashion industries, we buy far more too much than what we need. My wife always say, oh, you know, next weekend, there's gonna be a big sale in designer outlets. We should go. And that's actually a result of average consumer in the West brought 60% more clothing in 2014 compared to the 2000 level. But each of the garment kept at half as long. But this is not a problem for my wife. She rarely throw anything out. It's just we need to buy more wardrobes. Compared to the jeans, the 2 billion pair of jeans are sold worldwide in 2017, 2 billion. 70% are bought by the fashion chaser in the West. Compared to the per capita value on the left, United States per capita ownership for jeans is 8. Compared to China, it's 1, 0.3 is in India. The absolute gap is very huge here. But the young consumers under the fashion chaser in the mid class of in the mid class in the Indian and China, they are catching up. The growth rate of clothing buying in the United States and Europe is only 1 to 3% per year, but it's 7 to 10% in China. We did a quick test. If allow 80% of the consumer in the emerging market to achieve the fashion level as we have in the Western level, we're going to generate 80% more CO2 emissions. We're going to require 20% more water and 10% more land resources. So really, we're going to need to make a solution for the sustainability. How we are going to do that? We give the respect. We have a basic living standard for the carbon. We are here, we have a carbon footprint, have a decent living standard. But we have to think our choices. Next time when you travel, when you have your meals, you have a choices to choose and reduce what we can and offset the rest. The most important is we make the future fashion more sustainable, but most important, we need to deliver sustainability as fashion. So the immediate change can start right away. There's a famous Planetary health diet. It calls for eat more vegetables and more greens, and they reduce the meat consumptions, and they are actually feeding for the global fast. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. Yeah. One last sentence. Why not we change such a sustainable diet? It not only benefits our own health, but also reduce our emissions. Most importantly, setting a fashionable trend for allowing the developing country population to follow, to transform their lifestyles. Therefore, we are going to have a better future. Thank you.